Welcome to the Zachrilege cast. Sarah Levin, how are you doing this fine afternoon?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm glad we could work out schedules. I know you have a busy job. It's a little more public, and I have a recently started job that occasionally involves staying late when you're not ready for it. And today, luckily, I got to get home and I have my Nanocon shirt on, so I think we're ready.
Oh, that's awesome. I wish I had mine. Nanocon was great. That's how we met for all of you watching or listening.
I know it's a long time coming. I think we've 4 or 5 times tried to schedule it, and due to personal scheduling on I think both sides, we
Mostly my fault. Mostly my fault. I'm sorry
you're
about
busy,
that.
important, all that good stuff. But we'll get started once I actually find my questions. There you go. So usually I start with asking a question about like somebody's personal religious journey, and clearly you never had that background. But I did want to ask. I mean, you can talk about your kind of background, your family background, and also what is it like to be a Hebrew school dropout?
Where did you find that? I don't even remember when I said that.
One of the previous interviews, it might have been Mythicist Milwaukee, or yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you really did your research. I am a Hebrew school dropout, and every time I say that, I think of the what is that song? Beauty school dropout, except it's Hebrew school dropout. So I was raised by two atheists who are also culturally Jewish, and they are both immigrants from the former Soviet Union. My mother's from Ukraine, my father's from Belarus. And there was no religion in Soviet Russia, or no access to it at the time they were growing up. But they wanted me and my sister to have access to an education so that we understood where we came from, and our background and heritage. So I did go to Hebrew school. It was sort of a watered down Hebrew school, I would say. I like to joke that, and it's not really a joke. We would go every Sunday, and then we would learn one of the Hebrew letters, but there weren't enough weeks in the year that, with all the vacations and everything, to get through the alphabet. So I learned the first half to maybe 2/3 of the Hebrew alphabet really well, and then never learned the end of it because they would start over the next year. So I just dropped out of that when I was
Like, talk about
older.
spoiler alert right there. Don't tell me how it ends. It's like Game of Thrones. Don't tell me.
Exactly. So I've met lots of. It's funny. I've met people who grew up around a lot of Jewish people, who've been to way more bar mitzvahs than I have. I can like count on one hand how many I've been to, who I found have been more educated on the actual religion of Judaism than I have. But I do feel very strongly culturally Jewish, and that's been a part of my upbringing. We still do the high holidays in a very secular way, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, and all that sort of stuff. But it's, so many Jewish holidays are about remembering the history, even if it's sort of mythical nature. It's always sort of a metaphor for the history of the Jewish people. And the kind of dark joke is that Jewish holidays are really summed up by, they tried to kill us, we survived, and now we eat. But in all seriousness, I do think it's important, regardless of being secular and being a pretty atheist family. Our history as a family and where we came from is very important to us. And where we came from, and the experience of my grandparents on both sides, was that it didn't matter whether you practiced or not; you were still a Jew. I've seen a copy of my mother's passport that said Jew on it. Because we were othered in the former Soviet Union. It didn't matter whether you practiced or not. That's who you were. And then that meant that there were certain opportunities that weren't available to you, and you could be targeted for discrimination or worse. And so that's something that I carry with me, but from a cultural and secular perspective, and not a religious one.
Yeah, and it's like a double-edged sword is correct, but in terms of like a lot of people with Jewish background really aren't religious, but they keep the tag, and then being from former Soviet Union, that wasn't a religious area, but yeah, you were kind of tagged by that history and kind of forced to leave, or like your lower status. But I almost wish, and I've said this many times on the show, I almost wish that other religions were like the people who were Jewish in that they kind of knew how to kind of keep it separate? Like they're like, this is my history, but I'm not going to take it seriously.
Well, I mean, I think you're describing American Jews tend to be pretty secular. But if you look at, the only Jewish state we have, Israel, there's definitely a pretty serious entanglement of religion and government there. So I wouldn't give the Jewish people a break on, being somehow absent from this tendency to, once you're in the majority, wherever you are, want to entangle the majority religion with your government. Unfortunately, I think that's just a human problem.
I know it means the kind of work you do probably is can transfer anywhere and will never be something that'll just be like, we don't need this anymore. So we want to talk clearly about Secular Coalition for America. What was your kind of background? How did you get on board? What's your current position now? I feel like I've seen a few titles for you, so you can clear that up for at least the recording today, and then things will change.
Yes. Well, on May 31st, 2019, I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs. But I've been with this organization for nearly 6 years now. And so I've had a lot of different roles over the years. I went to school at American University in DC, where I was part of the leadership team of the Secular Student Alliance, which is still around. And I was one of those people who I had a predetermined list of places that I wanted to intern before I graduated college, in the spirit of ambitious DC students. And Secular Coalition was on there. That was something I was very interested in. And I made a beeline for the Secular Student Alliance group when I came to campus because I did want to find like-minded people. And so I got really involved in the Secular Student Alliance, and I really enjoyed the community it provided and the discussions. But ultimately, what I was really interested in was how religion was impacting my life and other people's lives. I was less interested in talking about religion itself so much as how religion was encroaching on policy and the laws that impact everybody. And I had my own sort of pet issues that I cared very much about, reproductive rights being one of them. And when I started looking into the Secular Coalition even more and applying to intern there, I learned about all of these different policy spaces that I hadn't even thought about, where religion was encroaching in a really harmful way, whether that was tax policy or children's rights, so many public health issues outside of, in addition to reproductive rights, LGBT rights, the military, and on and on and on. And so I just got even more interested in it and became an intern. Soon that turned into executive assistant, and it kind of just went from there. And I've had a lot of different roles at the organization and have enjoyed every bit of it.
Well, what is kind of the, I guess, elevator pitch for Secular Coalition for America for the people who aren't as familiar?
Sure, absolutely. So our mission is to bring visibility and respect to non-theists and to advocate for the separation of church and state as the best guarantee of freedom for people of all faiths and no faith. And we are a coalition now of 19 national member organizations. We started out about 17 years ago with 4, so we've really grown. And I think in addition to lobbying at the federal level on your behalf, if you're a non-theist or if you're an ally who supports the separation of church and state, we also play a huge role in, as a coalition, of bringing all of these different organizations together that have that serve different non-theists. All of our member organizations serve non-theists in some way, shape, or form. So you might have heard, if you're listening, some of these organizations like American Atheists or American Humanist Association, Center for Inquiry, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Ex-Muslims in North America, and so on. These groups, some of them are, they're all over the country, although a few of them are in DC. They serve different types of non-theists, have different types of ways of organizing and identifying, but the thing that brings them all together is the separation of church and state, and this understanding that we do need to work together to make sure we have a political voice, because if we don't have someone speaking on behalf of non-theists in the political sphere and elsewhere, then no one is going to speak for us. Or actually, people will speak for us, but our opposition will be defining who we are and how we're represented in government and in the media and so on. And so a big part of what we do is coalition building and bringing those groups together. We do an annual members meeting where the executives of all 19 member organizations come together to talk about how to build our movement, to talk about about how to coordinate better and collaborate. We also manage working groups among the communication staffers, among the grassroots staffers, among all the lobbyists and attorneys that are meeting monthly to discuss what we're working on, share best practices, and work on group projects together so that we can pull those resources and have a bigger impact with a united voice. So for example, the Secular Week of Action earlier this year was the first time that we took something that's actually been happening at the local level for a while, but we nationalized it, and we worked with our member organizations to elevate that idea of, you know what, around the National Day of Prayer, which is just so deeply offensive to our community, instead of just talking about how that shouldn't even exist, let's counter with something meaningful, which is action, because we have there's a stereotype about our community that, you know, of course you're familiar with, that we don't have values, we don't stand for anything, because the assumption is that you need to have faith or subscribe to a religious faith to make meaning in your life. And we know that that's not true. The secular community cares very deeply about the world and the community, and we see them active in all sorts of causes and helping the needy and all those sorts of things, but it doesn't really get recognized. And that recognition will help to just chip away at that stereotype that that's not something that we're motivated to do. And so the Week of Action was really about having folks across the country in our communities take action as a contrast to this, frankly, empty moral signaling of the National Day of Prayer, and actually, you know, go do river cleanups and go pick up the trash in the community and go feed the homeless and go do a letter writing campaign. And there were groups across the country doing all sorts of social, political, and charitable actions that week. And that was, and it was humanists, and it was atheists, and it was humanistic Jews, and it was the ethical societies. And that was a result of working together with all of these organizations and all the folks who are liaising with their affiliates, chapters, whether it's humanist groups, atheist groups. Those things are made possible by having an organization who, part of our mission, part of our name, Coalition, is to really make sure that that kind of collaboration is being facilitated in a meaningful way, and in a what's the word, in a way that is intentional.
Right. And I'm sure people who are listening and or watching are probably saying, well, what can I do? Well, we're going to get there. But, you know, that's a little tease. Now, you mentioned, the funny thing is I was going to make a joke question like, hey, can you name all 19 of the member organizations in alphabetical order? But you've already named like half of them. So what was the most recent one? One of the interviews I heard, I think I heard 18. So clearly there's been an addition.
Yeah. The latest addition was Foundation Beyond Belief.
Out of Atlanta, I think.
I think they're based in. Yeah. Well, they have affiliates all across the country, and if you are a local group that is doing volunteer service, you should absolutely affiliate with Foundation Beyond Belief. All it gets you, all that it takes is signing up, and you don't have to really do much except report what you're doing. You get all this free stuff and free resources. You might get T-shirts. You know, it's really like a win-win to affiliate with Foundation Beyond Belief. And I like to plug that because of what I was just talking about, where we're not, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive. You want to do good things just to do good things, and you don't want to brag to everybody that you're doing good things. But the truth is that our community doesn't get credit for all the good things that we do, and we need to elevate and give visibility to the actions that we're doing because of goodness sake, not because we're looking for a reward, not because we're you know, worried about punishment from some higher power, but because we believe it's the right thing to do. And showing that to the public is important because, again, it chips away at that idea that you can't be moral and a good person if you don't have faith. And just simply reporting to a national organization that is that can elevate the work that you're doing, whether it's your highway cleanup or if you do some sort of meal packing maybe once a month. If you're not affiliated with Foundation Beyond Belief, you're missing an opportunity to really elevate what you're doing, not just in your own community, but in this sort of national image that we have of you're contributing to the national image we have as a broader secular community. So I'm glad that they joined us. They do really great work. So definitely check them out, especially if your group is engaged in charitable services.
But does it help kind of the Secular Coalition for America that there are these groups that can do kind of a lot of the local work, since you are focusing on like DC and kind of national issues and issues that atheists should be able to agree on? Whether we do or not is a different question, but the fact that we should is clearly there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I get calls and emails all the time asking where the local secular coalition is, and the answer is there isn't one. You can join our political advocacy work, at the local level, but we don't build communities. That's what our member organizations do. We mobilize the existing communities that our member organizations are working so hard to build and maintain and grow for political advocacy. And so that's really our focus, is mobilizing our constituency to take political action and to do it effectively together. We have been a little more engaged recently in helping to strengthen local communities, not build new ones, but network the existing ones, because we found that local groups are not as well networked as they should be in the same area. They're actually, we did a 120-day needs assessment last year and found that groups were reporting feeling somewhat and pretty well connected to national organizations, but very disconnected from local groups around them. And that's a big problem for us at the Secular Coalition, because if we need an immediate response statewide or from a specific district or whatever it is, if the groups in the area are not well connected with each other, it really gets in the way of being effective, of responding to whatever political issue is happening in a way that is united. If you want to get a sign-on letter from all the local groups in an area to a lawmaker at the state level or the federal level, you want to be able to do that really quickly and efficiently. And a lot of times it is time sensitive. And so you need all the local leaders of the humanist group, the atheist group, the ethical society, the humanistic Jewish congregation, and so on, whatever is in the area, they should all have personal relationships on a first name basis, so that when, I can, call Zach and be like, hey, I need help in Tennessee. Can you, get the word out? This is what I need. That's not really possible if the groups are disconnected from each other. And so one thing we did this year was facilitate 3 leadership summits in Southern California, in Nashville, where you were, Zach, on the Sunday program, and in South Carolina as well. And the point was to really, it was kind of threefold. One, and probably the most important, was networking, was to really get folks in a room together who share the same goals, maybe have different communities, but all have an interest in building our influence as a community, and getting them to just get to know each other on a first name basis, so that next time they want to work together, it's not some stranger emailing, that it's Zach, who I just met in person and broke bread with. We had lunch. So networking was part of it. Part of it was also sharing best practices. We really are losing resources, valuable, limited resources, when one group is doing something, has figured it out, and the other group is reinventing the wheel over here, not realizing that this group has already figured out how to do that. Whether it could be anything, like how to be effective on social media, or bylaws for when they're incorporating as a C3, or learning how to advocate for the first time, or whatever it is. There are things that groups have figured out how to do really well, and if they can share that expertise with other groups in their areas, then everyone benefits. So it was skills building, it was networking, and of course, us being Secular Coalition, focused on political advocacy, we were really trying to get local leaders to come up with a shared agenda in advocacy. So whether that was at the local level, at the state level, or working with us at the federal level, even if folks are more interested in doing federal and state and local work that we're not as engaged in right now, the more secular constituents that are getting involved in any issue, as long as they're doing it as a secular constituent and identifying themselves that way when they're engaging with lawmakers, engaging with decision makers, that brings visibility to the community as a whole. Because a big part of, I mentioned our mission earlier, and it was sort of 2 parts. Aside from the coalition building, there's visibility and respect of non-theists, and their separation of church and state. And a big part of visibility of non-theists is people engaging in actions and letting people know when they pick up that phone to call their member of Congress, and the first thing they say is, hi, my name is Zach, and I am a secular constituent, or I'm an atheist constituent, whatever you identify as, because that's something that is still not well enough understood, that we are a constituency that has a platform. And I want to just say one more thing in response to what you said, Zach, about, whether we agree or not on things. I mean, we're not a monolith, absolutely. But I think what's really, really underplayed is how much our community agrees with each other on issues. First of all, one of our signature resources at the Secular Coalition for America is our Model Secular Policy Guide. And it has every single issue that we take a position on and our policy recommendation for that issue. That thing is like 40 pages long. And it is endorsed almost like 99% of it. I can think of maybe one or two issues that one or two organizations has some issue with. But for the most part, all 19 of our member organizations agree with all of those issues. That's really impressive. That's a huge, and again, it's health policy, it's tax policy, it covers everything. And if you look at the data, and I don't have it right in front of me, but there's data from Pew's research that shows where where religiously unaffiliated. Now remember, religiously unaffiliated isn't just non-theists. It includes people of faith who don't subscribe to a specific denomination. It also includes sort of everybody in between. But that whole block of unaffiliated with religion, and you compare that block of people to white evangelicals, on attitudes about issues like same-sex marriage and whether or not a business should be able to turn you away on the basis of their religion, and access to abortion and issues like that. The religiously unaffiliated agree on those issues in greater numbers, as much as 10 percentage points more than white evangelicals do. If you think about that, and you think about, even an issue like abortion, that we agree as a block of people more than the evangelicals do, and then you look at our politics and see I was surprised when I looked at the numbers, because I thought our numbers would be lower in terms of agreement and theirs would be much higher, but it was the opposite. It's just that they're very well organized and very ideologically motivated. And so it seems like they're the monolith where, they're in complete agreement, all of these evangelicals, about the issues, and then you look at our politics and the influence they have on those issues like LGBT rights and reproductive rights. What that tells us is that if we can be as enthusiastic and as organized as they are, we can blow them out of the water in terms of political influence, because our numbers are increasing while theirs are decreasing, and we actually agree on the issues more than they do. And remember, it's a whole unaffiliated block. So that means including people of faith who just don't subscribe to a religion anymore, to a specific denomination, are on the same page as the atheists and the agnostics and the humanists. That's really, really powerful. And I think it's really, it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, it's got two sides to it. It's like it's inspiring because like you look at the numbers, and then it's depressing because you're like, that relatively small group has seemed to rule America policy since like 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And they are ruling our narratives. I think one of the things I was thinking about when I mentioned like our not getting along is the seeming ability of like people who are progressive and atheist secular taking on kind of right-wing talking points, and like the domination of that narrative right now, it's just so prevalent. And you talked about narratives when you're at Nanocon. So how do we kind of frame conversations when you're talking to somebody, especially like somebody in the South who's, a congressman, has a giant, cushion and probably will win no matter what, talking and kind of maybe adjusting a narrative a bit to at least say, hey, you gotta at least listen to us?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we have to start leading with our values and choose values that a lot of people, even if they're on the other side of us politically, could agree with. So, one of the things I talked about in Nanocon is some of the language we use at the Secular Coalition. We talk about freedom, for example, and say that, freedom means that your beliefs are protected, but they're never imposed on you. And if you don't even mention an issue and you talk to a conservative and say, don't you think that nobody should push their beliefs on you? That no one should tell you how to pray or where to pray, or all those sorts of things. We shouldn't have other people imposing their religious beliefs on us. They'll probably agree with that. And you can start with that as a baseline and say, well, we as atheists, or we as a secular community, we have our own beliefs. They're just not based in religion, but we do have our own values and moral system and system of ethics. And when even if someone is in a certain religion is in the majority, first of all, even if the country is majority Christian, not all those Christians are not, they don't represent all Christians. There's many, many different denominations of Christians, and you'll find Christians that are here on an issue and on the opposite side of the same issue. So if you point that out, but you started from a place of we don't want beliefs to be imposed on us, you can at least find some common ground about, well, yeah, certainly, that's religious freedom, right? And then you talk about how when one religion is in the majority and imposing those beliefs on everybody else, how that's a violation of religious freedom, and talk about not just how that impacts the secular community, but other religious minorities. So you can go back to our history and talk about how Catholics were treated by Protestants when they first came here, right? Those are two Christian denominations where Catholics came over and they were the minority at the time, and they were the targets, and their religious freedoms were being violated. And so if you start from a place of this is a value before you even get into the issue, I think that's really helpful, even if they're not going to agree with you. I mean, I've had some really productive conversations with very conservative offices by starting with that kind of common ground. We also talk about, when we talk about equality, we talk about both equal rights, but also equal responsibilities. And again, without even saying anything about issues, you could say, don't you think that everybody should be equal before the law, in terms of being protected? And wouldn't you agree that everyone should, when it comes to laws, everyone should play by the same rules, especially if it comes to something like public health and safety? Everyone should be playing by the same rules, no matter who they are. And they'll probably agree on that. And then you can kind of go into some of the issues where that's not really the case, like how not everyone's rights are being protected equally. For example, that you can get married on Sunday, to someone of the same sex, and be fired the next day for having done that. Is that really fair? You might believe that it's wrong, but that person who just got married has a different belief than you, and should people be subject to the religious beliefs of their employers? Or talking about, I think talking about reproductive rights is difficult, but if you're talking to someone on the other side of choice. But one thing you can do, because this does exist, there are people who are pro-life personally, but pro-choice in terms of policy. And that's perfectly fine. And the way you come to that conclusion is by acknowledging that I have my own deeply, sincerely held belief about when life begins. And this person has a different interpretation of that. I recognize that that is personal to me and personal to them. And therefore, I can be, say against abortion, but support your right to have your own interpretation, because this is something very personal. And that's okay. And you can, and there are people who think that way. In fact, Senator Casey is one of those people who has a generally pro-choice record, but isn't personally, is personally pro-life. And that's perfectly okay. That's a great example of how you separate your personal beliefs from what you are going to legislate or what you are going to vote for in terms of taking someone else's right away. So I think it's really starting with that kind of really high level idea of, you have your beliefs, I have mine. I shouldn't push mine on yours. You shouldn't you shouldn't push yours on me. How do we get there though? How do we make sure that you can live out your life, I can live out my life, and we're not treading on each other? And then get into the issue and make sure, especially if you're talking to an area where, like you said, they're cushioned by all these folks who believe the way that they do. Talk about not just how it impacts you as someone from the secular community, but how it could impact their own constituents, because you might not be in the majority forever. And so don't you want to protect the institutions that will protect you when you're in the majority, but also in the minority?
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of good points. And yeah, in terms of people in office, just kind of having that idea of, I don't know, it's like the reminding conservatives, remember when you were conservative and cared about, the actual budget and doing all these restrictive laws on restricting abortion? I don't see that a lot from the side that's like anti-abortion, being like, I'm personally anti-abortion, but I don't want any laws. It doesn't. It seems like there's this monolith, which maybe you can break up with these individual conversations. And one of the ways you're trying to do that is through your rapid response. And I went through that training. And so, what is this all about? And what are you trying to do with this? Since you're just one person, right? You gotta.
Sure. So we are trying to build teams of constituents in as many congressional districts in the country as possible, who are working with our team, with me, your lobbyist, directly in DC. And of course, there's 435 congressional districts, so we want to have constituents in every single district in the country. And the reason is because, I can talk to members of Congress and their staff till I'm blue in the face, but if they've never heard from a constituent and they don't have a relationship with a constituent, me telling them that the religiously unaffiliated are the largest, fastest growing religious demographic in the country is meaningless to them if they haven't heard from constituents in their district. Even if I can show that there are constituents in their district, that's helpful. But if they haven't heard from them, if they're not an active constituency that they believe will vote in the next election, then it's not quite as meaningful. And so the most impactful kind of advocacy you can do in terms of, liaising and contacting members of Congress and their staff is doing it in person. And so a big part of our training is teaching you how to do an in-person sit-down meeting with the home district office of your members of Congress. All of your members of Congress, your senators and your representative in the House of Representatives have offices in the home state and in the home district. And the Senate offices often have more than one. And so that means that there is an office that you can go to and that is close proximity to you and sit down and have a conversation with a person. And that's important because those offices play a very important role in sort of being the eyes and ears of the office. Because remember, elected officials are always thinking about their next election, and when they're thinking about their next election, they're thinking about what are my constituents happy about? What are they unhappy about? And when we say constituents, we mean constituents that show up. The constituents that show up to meetings at town halls and who contact us, who have some influence, and who we can predict are actually going to show up on election day. Because being a constituent isn't enough. It's a constituent that is visible, which means that they expect you to show up on election day. And so the district offices keep an eye out on what the constituents are happy about and what they're not happy about, and what's going on, and relay that back to the DC office. There's almost guaranteed there's someone who's in charge, for example, of compiling and paying attention to the letters to the editor of your local paper. Why? Because that's a great way to gauge what is going on in the area and what people are talking about, what they care about. And so rapid response is a great way to get very directly involved in impacting policies. So what we do is we have our issues that we're lobbying for on the federal level. I can talk about that in a little bit. We give you all the resources, the training, of course, but also the kind of polished professional materials you can bring with you to staff and to the member if they're available in the home district office. And you're not just doing this once to say hi and that's it. You're building an actual relationship with a person, and that's really how things get done. These are people who are working, who you've elected, and there are people who work for them, and people are more responsive when they have an actual relationship with someone who they know, who they can trust, who's been reliable, who's been honest. A lot of advocacy and the things that we do isn't just going to an office and say, please vote for this or please vote against this. A lot of it is education, is telling them about who the secular community, who the secular coalition is, who our member organizations are, what are secular people, what do we stand for, how do they organize, are there secular communities in their district. A lot of it is just educating them about the community, and also of course the issues that we care about, that we want to raise. And so one thing that I really encourage folks to do when they're involved in rapid response is to bring their local affiliations with them into those meetings. If you're part of a local atheist group, you're part of a humanist group, maybe an Oasis, maybe a Sunday Assembly, just mentioning that when you talk to those staffers is really important, because every single interaction you're educating someone who may not think that they've never met an atheist before, or maybe they have an idea of what non-religious people are like, but they didn't know that they were actually organized as a community. And you might be able to get your local group on the map for district outreach. So the next time they're planning the schedule for their boss of, where the photo ops are going to be and where the constituent meetings are going to be, maybe your local group is going to be on the list because you showed up and you have a relationship, and you have contact information for people who do that day-to-day work. And so it's really fun. I think that folks find it to be intimidating, but once you do it once, you're just addicted because it's so fun to do. And one more thing I'll say about it is that so few people actually do this kind of work. Go and sit down with somebody and talk to them and then follow up. That those that do have a disproportionate amount of influence, and that's why it is so important that our community get involved in this kind of work, because if we don't, that just huge gap between our numbers and how much we agree on things, and then the evangelical numbers and how much they agree on things, that's just going to continue in terms of them having disproportionate influence and us being completely underrepresented in government, both in terms of how many elected officials are openly non-theistic, but also elected officials advancing a secular, protecting the secular character of our government. That's just going to continue no matter how many unaffiliated people there are in the country, if we're not engaged in the electoral process, as well as the kind of work we're doing with rapid response.
Well, how does one become a rapid responder?
That's a great question. You can go to secular.org and sign up. It's under grassroots activism. You can also just email me, sarah@secular.org, sarah@secular.org, and I will get you set up. It really is, even though it's an in-person meeting, you don't have to do those very often. You can do them once or twice a year, and that's enough to build, that rapport with a person, and then you can call them, you can write them, and just continue to build a relationship with the offices in your area. And if you're looking for even more activism to do, you can actually be a district captain and represent your entire congressional district and help us recruit more people to represent your congressional district as well.
And do you feel like there's certain areas of the country where you need more representation, or is it pretty much just everywhere?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm looking, I have a map on my wall, so that's why I'm looking this way. I think the more people we have in the biggest trouble spot areas of the South and the Midwest, the better, because we those are places where the visibility really, we need more visibility. We need those members of Congress to understand that they have secular constituents. I think swing states are going to be really important. So if your state is particularly important in 2020, then that's a really good reason to be just involved with us in general. But generally we need people everywhere. If your member of Congress is on a really important committee, like the Appropriations Committee, or Judiciary, or a committee like the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Those are really powerful committees. So if we have good relationships with those offices at home, that really helps. But really everywhere, absolutely everywhere. We want 435 districts.
Well, I did the training, and now this is something you do that's usually like in the evenings. And so you've already been working a long day. How do you keep the energy level up being kind of a full-time activist? And is there ever any case of burnout, and what do you do to kind of keep that energy level up?
That's a really good question. It can be really difficult, but I think, I just get inspired by the activists that get involved. The moment I feel really like things are just going downhill and everything is so overwhelming, there's always something that happens that gets me completely inspired, like our rapid responders getting an actual meeting with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and taking a picture of her with her wearing secular values voter buttons, or someone reaching out to me who we talked to like a year ago, who's a secular Republican who wants to start a secular caucus, or someone reaching out and telling us that, how they did their first meeting, and how, our Indiana, we had an Indiana, I think, 4th district rapid response group go meet with a very conservative office, and they got hugs at the end of it. It's things like that where it's like, you know what, we're really making a difference here, and that's kind of what keeps me going. And also, I don't mind doing these trainings in the evenings, because other people have jobs too. I'm paid to do this, and they have families and they have obligations, and then they spend time with me on an evening where they probably should be making dinner or something, or relaxing after their long day, and instead they're spending it learning how to do activism and adding activism on top of their everyday activities. And so I'm just really grateful for that. I'm really inspired by that, and I think that keeps me going.
Yeah, I think that's one of those narratives that seems like, oh, things are getting worse, people are getting more polarized, but sometimes it is a matter of like one conversation, one question, and you're like, well, maybe things aren't as bad. As much as humans are responsible for where we are, they're also going to be the people to turn it around. My cats are definitely not going to do it. I know that. That's my thing. We're getting close to the end, but I did want to ask one kind of personal question. So what happens to you when you run out of Frank's Red Hot?
Oh gosh. I very begrudgingly use some other alternative, like a Cholula, or some other inferior but also decent hot sauce. But pretty much I'm in an urban environment where I can walk to a lot of grocery stores and CVS's, so I don't really have a good excuse for being out of Frank's Red Hot very often.
Well, having Aaron Ra on, he's like the guy who's super into the hot food. And I told him that I had a beer locally that was barrel aged, but it also was aged with hot sauce. And he's like, ooh. And my thought was, you know what? I'm glad I tried that beer, but I don't think that's something that needs to be together. Two of my great loves together, but
things don't go together. But hey, there's somebody out there that loves that beer, and that's why.
Exactly. Yeah, you name it, it's definitely out there. And as much as I think there'd be tons of more stuff to possibly talk about, we're for once I'm going to try to do an actual show within my time parameters. So before we kind of call it a night, where can people find you? And of course, is there anything else that you really wanted to talk about and get out to the audience before we call it a night?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So first of all, donate, donate, donate. We operate entirely on individual donations. Every little bit counts, especially if you're willing to give a few bucks a month. That makes a huge difference. You can go to secular.org/donate. And in addition to Rapid Response, I do want to plug our party organizing program. If you are involved in your political party, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Green, Libertarian, and you want to promote secular values in the party, we have helped to facilitate secular caucuses across the political spectrum that are working to educate party leadership and peers in their party about the secular communities, so that we are getting reached out to like other constituency groups are during elections. Secular caucuses are also working to create resources for openly non-theistic candidates, so that they have a place to go where they can get volunteers and canvassers and financial support from their party. So opening up that space so that we have more representation of non-theists, and also working to influence the party platform so that they really elevate secular values and separation of church and state, because we believe that it's based in the Constitution. It should be nonpartisan. Secular values are American values, and every party should support the separation of church and state as a baseline. That may not be where we are now, but that's certainly where we think we should be. And we know that we have supporters in pretty much every political party. And so if that is you, if you are active, not just registered, but active in your political party, and you want to start a caucus, contact me. Let me know. We have resources for that. And obviously join Rapid Response as well. You can also sign up for action alerts on secular.org. You can get contact your members of Congress in a matter of seconds, and you just fill in your information, and it sends a letter on the issues of the day, and you can get that straight to your inbox, or by texting 52886. Text the word secular to 52886, and you'll get our text action alerts. That's my rapid fire actions.
I feel like you've done this before. I think you got it down. Like some people are like, wait a second, talk about myself. No. And then you're like, no, I got this. Trust me. This is the 14th time I've done this today. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing.
Well, thanks, Zach. I really appreciate you taking the time and all the rescheduling. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate that.
Well, I knew it'd be worth it in the end. And it's always great to talk to somebody who, it's like either somebody who's like a full-time content creator or somebody who does full-time activism. As much as some people do this as a hobby, I think it's important to see who's out there and who's helping kind of unite this community, because if we can't get together for political stuff and of course other stuff, but we'll just stick to that for now. I don't know what we're doing here, and I think we got to get involved. Other people are, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And
you don't speak up for yourself, somebody will speak up for you.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Sarah, and it was great to finally chat with you.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
All right.